fellow Rotarians. I'm a little nervous today because I'm afraid you must be sick of seeing me here. I've been here, I don't know, 5, 6 times telling you stories. But Mark insists that I'm still welcome. And I believe everything he tells me. He's an attorney. We always believe attorneys. But what Mark was referring to was something that happened a long time ago. To begin with, he mentioned that I enlisted in the Marine Corps. It was back in 1942, long time ago. I just turned 18. I turned 18 on June 21st. On June 23rd, I boarded a train to go down to Parris Island to begin my career in the Marine Corps. I left home on that day, and I did not return. My family did not see me for a little over 3.5 years. I came back on Christmas Eve of 1945. And as Mark said, I was involved in three amphibious assaults. And not to talk about war, that's terrible. But while I was on Guam, my MOS was 0321. I was a recon Marine, they call it, recon scout. And on Guam, my job was, I was assigned to a captain who was a company commander. And my job was to, early in the morning, just between dark and light, I would put on a camouflage uniform, camouflage my face, paint it with grease paint, stick shrubbery in my helmet, in the helmet cover, and I could go out into the jungle alone, very quietly, very surreptitiously, and go as far as I could go, sometimes 30, sometimes 35, maybe even 40 yards into a thick jungle. And the purpose was to locate some sign of our enemy. And I could go out and I might notice a Japanese or an enemy outpost on the defense perimeter, see a soldier in a foxhole. And I knew from experience that if I saw one there and another one here, I could tell by the arc of their defenses whether it was a platoon, a company, or a battalion, or whatever. And from where the defenses were placed, I could tell in what direction they would leave when they go in the morning. It would be, if they were protecting this side, they were going to go in this direction. And I would gather that information and try to get back to the captain to give it to him. If I couldn't get back, I had a hand a radio key, and I could send it back by Morse code. I had a long wire. But I would give the information to the captain, and each company had a scout, so that as each company reported to each scout reported to their companies, collectively they provided enough information for the regimental commander to decide in which direction he would send his troops. And the job I had was quite dangerous. We had 100% casualties. But I liked it, not because it was dangerous, but because I only had to worry about me. I didn't have to worry about the guys in my squad or in my platoon. I just had to take care of Larry. And that kind of appealed to me because I grew up in a slum. I was always a little guy, and I learned to handle bullies very early on in life. So I had a high opinion of myself. So I knew that as a scout, I could do the job, and I could do it better than anybody else. Well, maybe not. But on one of my scouting expeditions, I found a wire. It looked like a wire. The jungle is, imagine a jungle, vines, trees, vines wrapped around vines. Sometimes you have to cut your way through it, it's so thick. And the foliage is about head high. And there's no real light in the jungle because the canopy of the trees grows over the top. Everything, even the bright sunlight, it's in a shade, a bright shade inside. As I was moving along this one morning, I noticed the light hit a string. It was either a spider web or it was a very, very thin piece of wire. I wasn't sure. So I followed it to where it began, and it was a piece of wire. It was tied to the root of a tree. And when I traced it back, it was tied to an anti-personnel mine. Had I not discovered it, when my guys got up in the morning and went into the jungle, somebody would have tripped that, and it would have killed an endless number of people. So I was down working very, very carefully, disarming that thing, because if it went off, of course, I was history. So I was undoing it, and finally I let it drop, and I stood up, and there was a Japanese soldier scouting for his side, no more than 15 or 16 feet from me. And I looked into his eyes, and I knew he was as frightened as I was, because he had a Nagasaki 97 rifle, but when he saw me, instead of firing it, he kind of hid behind it. And he was a young kid, too. He was 18, I was 18. We were teenage boys in the jungle. And I suggested to him, I waved, go away. I didn't want to encounter him. And but he was a good soldier. He had to kill me, and I had to kill him. So I saw him bring up his rifle to fire, and I dropped in the brush. There's plenty of cover. Then I didn't know what to do. And then he threw a hand grenade, which landed behind me. Now my options were gone. I had to run from the grenade toward him. I carried a Thompson submachine gun, so I just stood up and I was firing. I fired maybe 4 or 5 rounds before the grenade detonated, knocked me forward, punched a hole in my shoulder, and knocked me out. When I came to, our corpsman, Bill Hoagie, had me sitting up, and he was putting a plasma injection in my arm because I'd lost a lot of blood. And I looked over and I saw the dead Japanese soldier. And I felt so bad about having killed him. So I asked Hoagie to sit him up so he wouldn't have his face in the mud. And I looked at him, and I can see his face in my mind's eye today. And it was justified. It was wartime, but when you take the life of another human being, regardless of the circumstances, you will be a changed person. That goes without saying. So I asked Bill Hoagie to go through the kid's uniform and find his identification photo. All Japanese soldiers carried a photo for pay purposes or whatever. And it's a little tiny, probably 2 by 3 inch photo. His name is on the back. And Hoagie gave me his picture, and I put it between my helmet and the helmet liner. And then when I went to the hospital ship, came back on duty and finished the campaign. Then it was over, I took that thing out, and I promised myself that I would carry that picture with me for the rest of my life. And if I don't connect with his family, I put in my will that I wanted to be buried with it. Because I felt like I owed him. He was a good soldier. He was doing his job for his country, and he got killed. And I happened to be the one that put him there. So I didn't feel sorry for myself or for him. I just felt that this picture, not a souvenir or a trophy, but I would carry it to honor him, because he died for his country. And I would hope that if I died, he killed me, he'd do the same thing for me. Then, a lot of time passed. 15 years ago, a friend of mine asked me if I would allow this young girl, I didn't know her, she was a high school junior, if she could interview me for a history project she was doing. She was at Needham High School. Sure. So I met with her. Her name was Casey Thomas, nice girl. And she interviewed me, and then she wrote a very long essay for her project, which Needham High School posted online, and it's still there. Last, maybe March, April of last year, back up. There's a society called the Obon Society. Their headquarters in the United States is in Seattle, and overseas it's in Tokyo, Japan. And the purpose of the Obon Society is to reconnect the Japanese and American countries and cultures together, to overcome the bad feelings of the war, and to do what they can to make amends. For example, the Obon Society, I've been in touch with a fellow named Mr. Makito Arai-san, and he's 83 years old. He's been doing this most of his life. And he has he has found and identified remains of American airmen who were shot down in Japan and had the remains returned to the families. And on our side, the people in Seattle have been finding people who fought in the Pacific and have Japanese flags. Back in the day, when a young man went into the service in Japan, he would have a fairly large flag. It was a white cloth with a red ball in the middle. And all his friends and neighbors and relatives would sign it. And he would fold that up and take it with him because he represented all those people when he went to war. When they were killed, the Marines or soldiers would look for that flag and take it as a souvenir. And the Oban Society had located many of these flags, and of course the servicemen would give them up. Some of them even went to Japan to present them to the family of the deceased guy. A noble gesture from a lousy circumstance. Well, when the fellow in Japan read Casey Thomas's interview with me, I noted in there about shooting the Japanese soldier and carrying his photo in my wallet for the rest of my life. And he said that's 74 years he's been packing that thing. That's admirable. So he contacted somebody in Seattle who contacted a fellow in St. Lucia, whom I know. Talk about around the world. Talk about technology. In one day, Tokyo, Seattle, St. Lucia, and Manchester, Mass. Are swapping emails. But he asked me, the fellow, his name is Nick DeVoe, down in St. Lucia, asked me to scan the photo that I had of the Japanese soldier. And I scanned it, and I emailed it to him. He then sent it all the way back to Japan, where they enlarged it, and they have a committee there, former military personnel and everything, and they looked at the emblem on his uniform, and they could tell from it, and they determined that he was in the Kwantung Imperial Command in Manchuria, and they were a division of them, 15,000 of them, were sent to Japan to defend the island before we invaded. That's how he got there. And they did all they could to try to identify him. And then I was contacted by email and said, could we possibly look at the back of the picture? There may be some inscription that would identify him. So I was advised to have it taken apart. When I had the photograph in my wallet, I wrapped it in Scotch tape, cellophane tape, and kept it in there for 74 years between my license and my credit card. And they advised me to get an antiques restorer to try to separate. So luckily I know one. His last name is Ladygood. I always liked his name, Phil Ladygood. And I went to his studio, and he has the desk and the strong lights and the little tools and everything and the big lamp. And he carefully took it apart, pulled the tape off, but unfortunately, once the photo paper was exposed to the air, it just crumbled. And I said to him, why? And he said, well, can you imagine you take a page of the Boston Globe and put it in a closet shelf and let it sit there for 74 years. You try to pick it up, it will just turn into dust. And that's what happened to this. It had no body, so the photo is gone. And word was passed back to the Oban Society of Japan that it was a failure. But they didn't want to let the young man just disappear, even though they couldn't identify him. So they organized a ceremony at what they call the Ring of Peace in Guam. It's in a little town called Yago, Y-A-G-O, way up in northern Guam, up in the pretty part. Mark knows where it is. And they had a ceremony there last July, a couple of months ago, July 7th, in which they had a Chamorro chanter. The Chamorros are the natives of Guam, and this guy sings the old native chants from hundreds of years ago. They had a Shinto priest. The consul general of Japan attended. The governor, the highest ranking person in Guam, attended. And about 50 or 60 dignitaries from Japan and from Guam, in which they honored this young boy who gave his life for his country. And I have a I don't know if you can make out these pictures or not, but this is the, can you see that, Mark? That's the temple. This is about 30 some odd feet high. This is a little table down below. And you notice that black square in there, that's part of the monument. There it is there. And there's the picture of the young soldier. And there's a wreath here from the Consul General, from the governor, from the peace ring, and one from Lawrence F. Kirby, U.S. Marine Corps, retired. And this is a close-up of it. This is my picture, enlarged. It's about 18 by 12. And the date that he was killed, 27 July 44. And here's my name on the wreath over here, the Consul General of Japan. And this is the fellow that organized it all. He's holding the picture. And this woman with him, it works with the Obon Society, and her father was a Japanese officer who was killed on Guam. And she spent most of her life working with Obon to do some good in the world. And these are wonderful people. And as personally, my friend Nick DeVoe down in St. Lucia said, "I'm so sorry I got you involved with this. Now you don't have my picture, your picture." I said, "I've got his face in my mind. I'll never forget that." But I feel great because for the first time in 74 years, it's over. He died then, and he was honored here. It was his funeral. It was the end of the story. And I felt a humongous amount of grief lifted from me. I always felt a little guilt because I thought I was a better soldier than he was. That's why I killed him. Your mind that works crazy. But now that he has been so honored, I am relieved. And it's a sad occasion in a way, but it's a happy one in a way. And I'm glad to see that there are people in the world who are patching up the differences between one country and another after war. Because I know that when I went down to the islands, I first went down there in early 43, I firmly believed that all Japanese were like vermin and they have to be exterminated. They attacked our Pearl Harbor, and they're sneaky, no-good SOBs. But when you meet them on a personal level, one-on-one, and you shooting each other, you realize that they are you. They just look different. They wear a different uniform. But they're very courageous young boys, young men, who are serving their country, and they don't want to kill me any more than I want to kill them. And they were working at a distinct disadvantage, because at that time when a young man went into the military, the emperor would order him to die. In the late 20s, when the militarists took over control of Japan, they captured the Shinto religion. And they said the emperor is no longer the prophet or messenger of God. He is God. And what he says, that's God speaking to you. So these young boys through school were trained to believe that. And when they went into the service, the emperor said to them, "You cannot come home, you must die. If you don't die, your entire family will have to commit suicide in disgrace." So these, example in Guam, the Kwantung Imperial Command sent 15,000 troops down. There are a few thousand there already, maybe 17 or 18. All but maybe 40 of them died there. 1.3 million fallen Japanese soldiers are still, their bodies have not been recovered. And it made them a very ferocious enemy, because when you're fighting somebody who does not want to live, they can really do a lot of damage. And that made them fierce, that made them terrific. But I've always felt so sorry for them, because you can take any American 18 and 19-year-old, give him a gun and send him out to defend his country. He'll do anything as long as there's a chance that he won't walk off a cliff for you. But he'll go up against 100 people because there's a shot of making it. And but that's the story I want to tell you. I'm grateful. I'm relieved that this ceremony was held because the guilt I held has been erased, and I'm a happy camper. But Mark said I should tell you the story. Is there any questions? Yeah, fire away.
Was his family, was there ever any connection with his family?
No, because we couldn't identify him from the photograph. He's unknown. But there's a monument now with his picture on it, not his face, not his name, but a picture on it in perpetuity. So who knows, maybe one day they will identify him. I don't know. But that's all I have. Oh, go ahead, sir.
So, Larry, the picture itself is gone?
Say again?
The picture that you had?
Oh, yeah, it just disappeared.
I need a picture of that.
Oh, yeah, you have a copy.
I have a picture if anyone wants to see it. That's the picture. Larry had that presentation.
Yeah, when did you take that here one day?
No, remember we had the dinner. And I said, do you mind if I take a picture of that?
Oh, yes.
So there's the picture we had the dinner.
Well, I have it in my mind. I don't need that. Yeah, well, we looked at the photographs that I had of the ceremony. Yes, Patrick.
So Larry, back in those days, as a scout, you had said you only have to think about yourself, which was good. Did you volunteer for that, or did they assign it? Did they ask any input? How did that happen?
I was assigned. The Marine Corps was one of the first branch of the service to profile people. So they looked for little guys, I certainly qualify, who grew up in a tough neighborhood in the city kids, who weren't bullies, but they always knew how to get even, and they had an IQ in excess of 130. So you had to be bright, and you had to be battle-tested, if you will, and used to working alone. So when I was training with other scouts, well, we went down to the island, and we were assigned to the 3rd Division. There were about, I don't know, 12 or 13 of us. We then split up and sent to different companies. And we're all together once. I think the tallest guy was 5'7". And we called ourselves the Midget Brigade.
So given the casualty rates, did you feel you were given a lot of respect from your fellow folks serving in the Marines, that was on a position most people would want to be assigned?
Funny thing about the Marine Corps, you could be in the most dangerous job, or you could be a cook in Florida. We're all the same. Because you're doing your job and I'm doing my job. And that works. It's what makes the Marine Corps. I don't mean to say the Marine Corps is better than any other branch of the service, but I do know that in the Corps, we understand that every guy that is trained to go in the field has at least 12 or 13 people behind him training him. You know, the actual trainers, the truck drivers that transport you here, the cooks that feed you, the people that prepare you, the ordnance guys that make sure your weapon works. They all work very hard at their job. And if they don't do the job, the guy in the field dies. I'll give you an example. This is just off the cuff, but when I was in special weapons, I had to learn to fire the various machine guns that were in the inventory at that time. The one that was most often used was the air-cooled .30 caliber Browning. That's the standard one with the holes in the barrel you see with the tripod. And I remember trying to learn to fire that thing. I couldn't hit the side of this building with it. But there was a kid, I was 18, there was another 18-year-old kid who was in the group. And he was unbelievably accurate. When he sat down with that and fired it, he put every round in the target. He just was born to fire this weapon. And the instructor, the gunny sergeant, said he's never had a newbie, a new kid, who was that good at firing this weapon. So after we graduated, it was about a week or 10-day course, and after we were all certified to fire that gun, this kid, who was such a good shot, said, "Boy, when I get down the islands, I'm going to do a lot of damage with this weapon." And the drill instructor come over, I mean, he was instructor, the firing instructor, the gunny sergeant, come over, he said, pal, you're not going anywhere. You're going from private to corporal, and you will be here tomorrow teaching everybody how to fire that gun. He spent his entire 2.5 years in North Carolina, but he probably saved hundreds of lives. So he did his job. That was the feeling we had, that whatever your job is, if you do it as well as you can, we're all equal. And that also continues after you leave the service. If you're in the Marine Corps, and I was a platoon sergeant, the number 2 guy in 50 guys, and when if a lieutenant spoke to me, I came to attention and addressed him as sir. If I gave an order to a buck sergeant, he did as he was told. The chain of command was very firm, and you treated everybody with the respect that they deserved. But once you're out, you're just Marines. 3 or 4 years ago, this guy who is now the chief of staff in the White House, Jack Kelly, 4-star general, I had lunch with him at our birthday party in the convention center. And it was Larry and Jack, because that's the way they are. I don't particularly like the guy, but he's a fellow jarhead. But that's all. Okay.